you so much for joining me for this interview. I'm really excited about this one. I have a very special guest. His name is Alex Speers. For those who may not know him, he goes by the Twitter handle Al Baby Cakes. Although I guess now is it Al Baisley Cakes still, or if you've gone back and forth?
Yeah, as long as Bays is on the roster, I'll probably leave that.
So for those who may not understand that, Alex here is a frequent contributor for one of my personal favorite Oklahoma City Thunder podcasts called Down to Dunk. And then he's also now pretty much a regular contributor for several other NBA podcasts on The Athletic. Is that correct?
Yeah. The main one is Saturday Slam and Jam, and then occasionally I'll appear on other ones, but mostly that one.
Yeah, I mean, I thought I heard you on several leading up to the draft for sure, interviewing a lot of different NBA draft gurus and whatnot. So you're out there quite a bit, it seems like. So what is your background in terms of being a basketball fan, and what led you to covering the NBA on multiple podcast platforms?
Probably got to give credit to Andrew, who's the guy who actually started Down to Dunk, and he also got the job at The Athletic. Me and Andrew have known each other since kindergarten, so we go way back. And in high school, we both got into fantasy basketball and have been in a league since then. And like, I was into the NBA. I mean, I was a Sixers fan prior to being a Thunder fan, big Iverson fan. So like the 2001 playoffs was like a huge deal. And yet I was still like, I was in middle school. And so I didn't know the league yet. I just like followed the Sixers. Getting into fantasy basketball was the thing that like introduced me to the whole league. And then that just steadily grew. And then we got the team in like 2008 or whenever that was. And that obviously just took my fandom to another level. And ever since then, it's just been nonstop.
Did you remind me? Did you grow up in the Oklahoma area, or did you just go to school there?
Yeah, I did. I was born in Philadelphia,
Mhm.
but I moved. So all my family's back in Philly, but I grew up essentially in Oklahoma City for most of it. Yeah.
Yeah. He Andrew started the Down to Dunk podcast, and he started just asking you to come on as a contributor. But had already moved out to the West Coast at that point, pretty much?
Yeah. I've been out here in Portland, Oregon since like 2013.
Very nice. Um, so the reason why I asked you to come on here for this interview is I've been listening to your podcast recently, and it seems like you've been gaining an interest in basketball cards and collecting current young players and current Thunder players and whatnot. Was that something that you had done previously when you were younger, or is it really something that you are just kind of starting to get interested in now?
Not basketball, but I was a huge baseball card fan growing up.
Mhm.
So like all through the mid 90s into the early 2000s, junk wax era. In fact, I was just back in Oklahoma City and found my old baseball cards and was going through them to see if there's anything of interest, which I don't think there was. But yeah, I my favorite player was Alex Rodriguez. Like back in his Seattle Mariners days, I picked him because we had the same name, and so I have a ton of A-Rod cards, and so I was very into it back then, and then probably in high school fell off, and only got back in during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Originally got into Top Shot, and then after that kind of had its thing.
It ran its
I
course, yeah.
yeah, I started. I must have started watching. I think I started watching Pac-Man videos on YouTube. He just had a very soothing voice, and I just enjoyed watching them. Didn't really care about the subject matter, but then I started trying to collect like the Thunder rookies, which at that time would have been Baisley and Dort, and it was like obviously in some ways the best and worst time to get in because there was like a ton of like content to consume, and there's so many whatever you want to call them, like influencers out there where you can like learn a lot of stuff. But it was also the point where Baisley's Prism base, I could not find it for cheaper than $20, which is insane to think about. that like this mass produced card of a guy who's like not even, not even like a top 10 or 15 player in that draft
Hmm.
is selling for $20. Um, and so basically anything I did back then was a bad idea. But luckily I didn't make any like major purchases. I was just buying like smaller cards of the Thunder rookies, and then started buying some SGA PSA graded rookies. None of it was a good investment, but they were at least players that I liked, and so I don't feel too bad about it.
Sure. Well, yeah, and yeah, the pandemic certainly became an interesting time for a lot of people to try to get back into it, which I feel like it was one of the things that fueled a lot of people getting back into collecting cards. I think I've heard a lot of stories, a lot of interviews over these past couple of years, and they all sound pretty familiar. Which was, yeah, they started collecting cards when they were kids. A lot of people that were kids in the '80s and '90s and early 2000s. Even though that was considered the junk wax era, and most things in that era aren't really worth anything nowadays, it's still got just there were still a lot of kids that just started their collecting during that time period and just fell in love with it, and that just kind of stuck with them as they've gotten older, and now they have a little bit more money, a little bit more disposable income, and then the pandemic of course happened, and there's like nothing to do, nowhere to go, nowhere to spend your extra money on. There wasn't even any fantasy sports or betting going on for quite a long time period, and so a lot of people started getting into other things like cards or retro video games or whatever. So the collectibles industry as a whole really shot up like crazy. And so
Yeah.
when it comes to basketball cards, yeah, I mean even prism base cards for basic players, not even the really big time rookie names. Like Bobo cards were shooting up like crazy, and they were going for hundreds, and some of them going for thousands of dollars, and it was just a crazy time. And a lot of money going into the secondary market, and a lot of prices for any wax. Trying to open up any wax or trying to get into any of the breaks nowadays has just gotten insanely expensive. But I've been doing this for a while. I kind of got heavily back into it back in like 2012. That was a good time to get kind of back into it. And even though it was off and on for a few years there, I still built up a pretty good collection from like 2012 until like 2019, before everything really spiked up and went crazy. And so the things that I'm getting into now is helpful to already have tons of equity with the things that I have collected
Right.
prior to 2020. So I was interested in hearing from a person's opinion who is really kind of just now getting interested in these things, but also trying to get into it in post-pandemic times.
Yeah, I mean it's brutal. Like I don't I kind of had to force myself just to not spend a lot of money on it, because I feel like the returns, like at this point, just it does not make financial sense at all. And so I'm trying to figure out like what my like niche is going to be within the hobby,
Hmm.
because I hear people say like, well, if you're doing this to make an investment, like you're doing it wrong. Like if you're going to be in this long term, you have to collect stuff that you actually like,
Hmm.
which I completely agree with. But at the same time, when everything I bought, whenever that was, a year and a half, 2 years ago, has declined like 50% in value, it's like, well, I don't want to just like jump back in knowing that like, if there's like a big economic downturn that comes, I could get like these cards even cheaper. And so I've started looking one at other sports, and then also starting to look at like vintage cards, because it does feel like there is some like I don't even know if it's safety, but there's less volatility.
Hmm.
It feels like with some of the vintage cards, because the volatility, like right now, I mean, the stuff with like Trey Lance, like how much his cards shot up to in like these last couple months. And of
Yeah.
course he just got hurt. He's probably out for the year. But like that, I just like can't do that. Like that type of like prospecting is like so far beyond my budget. And it also just feels so dumb because like how good would Trey Lance have to be for those cards to just maintain the value that they're going for right now? Like it would be that would be amazing if they maintain that value in like 5 to 10 years. And so and I see the same thing. So I'm starting to get into soccer more as well. And that's the same way where like the prospecting is just kind of out of control. I mean, I guess that's it with every sport. But yeah, I'm starting to like dabble, or I mean, like I haven't even bought anything yet, but I'm just trying to like learn vintage cards first,
Mm.
with the idea that I'll eventually like start buying some of those, just because that feels better right now. Like I don't feel good about the idea of jumping into like Chet rookies. Like I love Chet, I would love to collect Chet, but at the same time, I know that like his cards are going to be just stupid these first couple releases this
Mhm.
year. So I don't really know what to do there. So it's a weird thing. It's like right now with basketball, it's like I'll go to my Fred Meyer's, like our grocery store,
Mhm.
and just like I'll check there like once a week and just hope to get lucky and get some retail cards because it's low barrier to entry, and maybe I'll get something, and at least I'll get like that fun of opening some packs, and
Mhm.
I'm not as worried about losing a ton of money. But outside of that, like I don't feel good about just like going and buying singles right now, even with like the decline in card prices over these last like couple months or so.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like things are really starting to even out in a lot of areas, but at the same time, yeah, you still see a lot of ultra modern stuff really be quite volatile, like you said, and then volatile in both ways because you woke up this morning and you start seeing two uh card prices just go insane
Yeah,
overnight, so it can kind of go both ways, but I'm with you. I've really I don't really have very much ultra modern stuff in my collection anymore. All my stuff is pretty much prior to 2010 for the most part. I
yeah,
still have a Kevin Durant rookie auto, and I still have like a Russell Westbrook rookie auto, and a few other semi modern things. But most of my stuff predate all that. So yeah, I've always been a big believer in collecting vintage, and whether it's um, high graded vintage or just low pop vintage stuff, that is a pretty safe route. But of course, I personally love it just because I've always been a big basketball nerd, is what I basically call myself. I've just always loved the NBA and the history of the NBA. I've been watching the NBA since the early 90s, long before I even could dream that we could possibly have an NBA team in Oklahoma City. There's no way, if you would have asked me growing up in Oklahoma City in the 90s, if that was something that was even possible for this area, I would
right,
be
yeah,
crazy. But so I've always had a love for the NBA regardless. And when we got our own team, that was just, icing on the cake. And, me personally, though, I did kind of come to a decision, a while back, that it may not actually be a good idea for lots of reasons not to get too heavily invested in 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 collecting things with an organization and a team that I'm already in love with and a big fan of. Is because I also don't want to have like monetary investment at the same time. I already have emotional investments in the team
right,
itself, and so
yeah,
it's like maybe I should keep those two things sort of separate. Also, the fact that it's the NBA, so your players are going to change hands quite often anyway. So
yeah,
with
for
with
sure.
like few exceptions, like Russell Westbrook, like uh, is it really? I don't know. I mean, Shea is a really smart investment out of all the potential current Thunder players, I would say. And I love Shea, but also, how long is Shea going to be in Oklahoma City? That's a good question. And would you still keep his cards if he were to be traded to another team here within the next year or two?
Right. Yeah, it definitely wouldn't have the same meaning that it does right now. And the other thing is there's just like so trying to it's hard enough to project like, okay, Prism is still going to matter in 5 years, like when Fanatics takes over or whatever, like,
Right.
but then trying to project like, oh, this specific Prism parallel is still going to matter in 5 years in an age when they just like keep expanding the number of parallels. And I that's why it just like it gets overwhelming at a certain point, and you're kind of forced to go along with like the conventional wisdom, which is like, well, people always like Prism silvers, so you can like feel good about that, or like optic hollows. um but at the same time, you just wonder with the changing of the guard with Fanatics. I know that I guess is the rumor, is it official that they're buying Panini?
I don't think it's actually official, but I've heard
Okay.
enough people who are in the know say that it's going to happen. So it seems like it's going to happen. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and but trying to like project what that how that changed. So that feels like it's going to be a major change, because you'll start getting like Topps Chrome basketball, I assume, again, which I always thought was like a really cool set. And so yeah, I am just kind of scared off. As much as I love like, especially last year's draft class, like with
Mhm.
Cade and Jalen Green, Evan Mobley. I love that draft class so much, and I was like, I have to buy like a box of something just because I love those rookies so much. But it just became a thing where I was like, I just can't do this. This is just too ridiculous. Like I was hoping to do it just for fun, but I just don't know how to collect like ultra modern cards right now in a way that feels good.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you, and I hear that sentiment from a lot of people. Because it's like I love so and so player, like I love John Morant, or I love Josh Giddey or Kate Cunningham, but it's difficult keeping track of all the different products, all the different parallels in each product. Um, it's hard to even keep track, like because Panini has done this thing for years where they don't really come forward with their print runs. And
Yeah.
so it's like people are excited about certain parallels, except they don't really serial number a ton of parallels anymore. And so it's like trying to figure out, okay, so how many optic hollows and prism silvers are they printing out in a given year of said player? And then over time people start kind of figuring out, and then all of a sudden you realize, okay, there are still like almost 10,000 PSA 10 Prism Silvers of Zion Williamson and John Morant.
Yeah.
So that's crazy. It's like
Yeah.
that used to be something that actually used to be pretty rare, or at least pretty scarce, and they
Right.
really aren't anymore. And you're right, the amount of parallels that they keep popping out each year. I think I saw something on Twitter the other day, with Trevor Lawrence cards. I think if I remember correctly, it was like Trevor Lawrence has over 160 one of ones.
Oh wow.
Yeah, quote unquote one on ones throughout all the different Panini products and everything. There are over
Yeah.
160 just one of ones. So like that's crazy. That's crazy. There are that many just those type of what are supposed to be truly rare stuff. But it's like, okay, so how many golds are there actually of him that are like numbered to 10 or less or whatever? there's
Yeah.
there's, there's got to be hundreds. And how many autographs does he actually have that are supposed to be quote unquote rare autographs? There's got to be thousands probably. So yeah, it's a lot to try and figure out, okay, so what are the things that are really going to truly hold value over time?
Yeah. And I yeah, I just I don't know how to handle that as a collector, which is why I started to look into soccer, because the prices were just cheaper.
Mhm.
Like I could buy a box of Topps Chrome for like $100 or something, and like that's not a lot for me to spend, and I could like get the satisfaction of ripping some packs. I don't know who most of these guys are, but it could still be like a little fun for that. And then I started getting into like vintage soccer, which is actually like really interesting, because like Lionel Messi and Ronaldo like don't have a ton of cards out there, but no one's like, if you compare like Lionel Messi's rookie cards to like Michael Jordan's rookie cards, like the price difference is like astronomically different. Um, so it felt like, oh, here's an entry point where I could actually like collect like a quote unquote GOAT player of a sport, and it could potentially be like reasonable in terms of price. So I've started like investigating that a little bit more. But yeah, I'm just worried about fanatics. Like I feel like there's an assumption maybe that like, well, Panini is bad in a lot of respects, so it has to get better than Panini. Like how could it get any worse? But I feel like Fanatics is going to be very good at like squeezing every last drop out of this thing. I do not trust that they're going to do this in a way that like makes it affordable for entry level collectors, but while also keeping like scarcity for like the real hardcore collectors. I'm worried that it's just going to be like Panini plus Tops just exploded on an even greater scale in a couple of years. I mean, I was watching these guys on YouTube, Lootbox TV,
Mhm.
who they always crack me up because they don't like know a ton about sports. They just love ripping packs. But they were talking about how on the Phoenix Suns website, Fanatics had started selling like a PSA 10 DeAndre Ayton Prism base,
Mhm.
like on the official team site, and they had priced it at $150. And he was saying like you could go and get this card for $30 on eBay or whatever. And that like he just took it as like a warning sign. Like this is an early red flag that like Fanatics is going to try to soak as much money out of this as they possibly can. So yeah, as much as I like am really interested in the hobby, it has in large part become like a spectator hobby for me. Where I like watch the guys I like on YouTube. I get to see like the most expensive boxes ripped and see what that's like, and realize that I would never want to do that because it's terrifying. But yeah, it's kind of like living vicariously through others, because actually collecting the things I would want to collect just would not be like financially feasible for me right now. Like I hate sticker autos. I think they don't look good. I hate that all the memorabilia is like non-affiliated. I mean, I
Yeah.
remember when collecting baseball cards, when like memorabilia cards started to become like a real thing, and that was like incredible back then. Like
Mhm.
knowing that like you actually had a piece of a bat from a guy that he actually used in a game, that like blew my mind as a kid. And now like I got 3 boxes of Prism retail. I just got lucky and was at my local Fred Meyer and got 3 boxes, and I pulled a Isaiah Livers rookie memorabilia card that was a piece of a Christmas sweater that was unaffiliated with Isaiah Livers. And I was like, who is this for? Who wants this? This is just a random piece of fabric that has no connection. It's not even a jersey. It's just a Christmas sweater. I was so confused. And this was like one of like the hits of this product that I was supposed to be excited about. I was like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah, I remember when they first started putting those. I think they put them in like Donruss retail
Yeah.
ever. So it's like, okay, really, really cheap bottom line retail. Yeah, they had like this really weird random Christmas sweater memorabilia pool or whatever. And yeah,
Yeah.
I started seeing that in Prism this year, and it's just like, oh my God, like what a joke, Panini. Why is this in your Prism product? This is supposed to be one of your flagship products, and you're putting random sweater memorabilia. Like I can kind of understand if it was like a practice jersey or
Right.
summer
Yeah.
league gear or something. But yeah, a sweater that has absolutely nothing to do with the team or at any point the player probably even touched it. So it's like, did they just literally buy a bunch of Walmart Christmas sweaters to put into their Walmart retail products or something? Is like, is that the tie into this or something? I don't. It
And
is beyond. Yeah.
it felt like the justification for it was, a lot of that like exploded during the pandemic, and it was like, well, they can't get the stuff or whatever, so they're having to make do. But now like we've gone through a season with fans in the building, and it's like, well, what's the excuse now? Like
Yeah, it's like
you you could have access.
yeah, it's like we've had the media days, we've had the in-person rookie events and things of that nature. Like there should be no more excuses. And yeah, I mean that is the thing. It's twofold of like, yeah, there's definitely concern with fanatics like really upping product and numbers and everything. But at the same time, I find it hard to imagine that Fanatics is going to do some of those memorabilia issues that Panini has been going through over the past couple of years, where, like you said, even in a lot of their high-end products, a lot of their patches or game-worn jersey or jersey cards not only are not game-worn or player-worn, they're not affiliated with the player or events or of any kind whatsoever. And this has been something going on for like 2 or 3 years now. And it's just
Yeah.
like, this is ridiculous. And people are still spending thousands and thousands of dollars on these products in hopes to pull a rookie patch auto, but the patch has absolutely nothing to do with the player or really the team whatsoever. It's literally like they went out and got a jersey from the Dick's Sporting Goods website or something and cut it up.
Right. And so it's like super easy to get caught up in the like excitement about these cards. Because like, yeah, RPAs like look really cool. But then when I start to like actually think about like what I'm getting so excited about, it's like I'm getting excited about a non-affiliated piece of fabric and a sticker auto that was like stuck on there by someone else. And these are in products that, like, you know, if people are buying hobby boxes, they're spending, you know, like $1 to $2 grand or more on them, and they're getting sticker autos. I just, I like, I feel like if I had all the money in the world, like I would only be buying like the top of the line, like National Treasures, because like those are the only products where I feel like are consistently the level of quality that I'm like looking for in sports cards. And I get it, like the hobby has exploded so much, like they have to meet that demand at to some level. And like, how can you really do that if without something like sticker autos, or like if you still want to have memorabilia, how do you get enough like actual jerseys that they've worn? But yeah, it all just like kind of leaves a sour taste when the price like continues to go up, or continues to stay at a really high level.
Yeah. Yeah. The price points, and a lot of it has been the distribution model that they have been so heavily dependent on over the years that seems to be going away too with the Fanatics takeover. And so once again, optimism in the hobby, once that happens, is that price levels will start going down because you won't have quite as many middlemen. Literally,
Yeah.
it often, these products often exchange hands at 3 or 4 different places before it finally gets to the consumer. So a more direct to consumer model with Fanatics seems to be what most people are going to expect, and that is of course giving a lot of people the optimism that prices will start to go back down to more reasonable levels, and especially like, you know, we need to start seeing more like actual like tiers of prices, kind of like what we used to what we saw back in the day. um but nowadays it's like, yeah, you have like maybe 3 or 4 lower tier products that you can buy at a reasonable price, and then everything else is like well over $500 or something. And
Yeah.
it's just like, it's hard. Like we need people that are on a budget or whatever, they really need to have more accessible products that they can still find really cool stuff in to pull stuff from, but it's got to be still more around the $100-$200 range that more people can afford.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I remember my first box was a box of Upper Deck Retro, which was a baseball card set that came in like a tin lunchbox,
Mhm.
which at the time was like very cool. And like the amount of value in that box, which I'm sure, like I thought it was exponentially expensive back then, but it probably cost like $200. But the value like in those old boxes compared to what I could expect if I like spent $500 or something. Like I almost bought a box of Photogenic, just
Mhm.
because I liked the artwork or the photography in it.
Yeah.
I just thought like, oh, here's like a new set where they're trying something new and like it looks good. It probably, you know, they might not do it ever again. Like who knows if this will become a yearly release. Um, but I was like pretty close to getting one of those, and I just still like could not justify it to myself. Which I mean, you probably can't justify buying any box
Yeah.
if you're just, because it's more about just the fun of ripping it.
Mhm.
But that was the one that like got me the closest, where I like really, I was like had it in a like in a shopping cart online. I was like, I really like these cards, be fun rip, but yeah.
Yeah, that looks like I really do like the look of that set as well, because yeah, it is like a throwback to top stadium club cards or things like that, where it really is all about the photography. And then at the same time, you see their big pulls, and they're still mostly sticker autos, like you said,
Right.
and it kind of
Yeah.
take a little bit away from it, you know.
Yeah. But I liked it because like, well, at least the base cards are like good to look at. Like
Yeah,
and there were a few poses on some of those base cards. I was like, I would just like to own that card, even though it's just like a base. I just like that photo. Um, so I don't know. I hope they're obviously going to continue to evolve, these companies, and I'm interested to see like what Fanatics carries over. Like if they're really going to own all of these properties, like
hmm
what are they going to view as worth carrying over?
yeah,
Because I'm excited about a lot of that top stuff coming back.
hmm
Because I just like the idea that like you can get a Topps Chrome of like an NBA player, you can get one of like a soccer player, and there's like some continuity between some of the sports eventually with like all these Topps Chrome cards. Um, but yeah, I'm sure it will be crazy expensive. So
yeah. But I take it you'll be kind of on the outside looking in for a while, and just to kind of see how things go, and before diving
yeah,
too deep into it.
yeah. I mean, honestly, I think if I like bought a single again, it would probably be a vintage card of some kind.
hmm
The problem with like basketball vintage is like if I do start collecting basketball vintage, I still would want to have like a connection to the player in some way. Um, and I guess there are players in like the 90s, like Shaq, that I might have like a connection with. But like collecting the really old players like from the 60s, 70s, I don't know if I have like a connection to any of those players to the point where I'd really want to like invest a large sum of money
hmm
in these players. Like obviously I wouldn't have necessarily an affiliation with the team. So like how do you go about choosing which vintage players you want to collect?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, for me personally, it was just kind of all about a love for the history of basketball, and just since I've been doing this for a while now in terms of collecting cards, I've learned a lot about the old sets, and just being fascinated with some of the history of some of the older sets like 61 Fleer, and 57 tops and 69 tops, and a lot of the other oddball sets that came out kind of in between those years, like 68 Jack in the Box, or things of that nature that were regional releases, or things that weren't like distributed out the way that things are now. And so finding
Yeah.
them in good condition and things of that nature is a challenge, and just kind of interesting to know why they were in fact rare, or why they were scarce to find. Like I'm a big nerd about the star card sets that came out between 83 and 85, when Topps stopped producing basketball cards after 1981, because it just wasn't very lucrative for them, because the NBA
Yeah.
wasn't quite as popular back then as it is now. And no one else was really producing cards until Fleer came around 1986. So Star was this little small company in New Jersey that got an NBA license to do cards from 1983 to 1985, and so you actually have some of the very first cards of guys that really transformed the game, like Michael Jordan and Charles Barkley and Hakeem Olajuwon and Isaiah Thomas and all those guys that were coming out before the really well known 86 Fleer set. So things like that I'm just kind of really interested in the history, and interested in why those cards are scarce and difficult to find nowadays. Those are the ones that I sort of started gravitating towards.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, I like the idea of collecting cards that have a story themselves,
Mm-hmm.
like why they're interesting or why they're significant. Because I don't think you can make that case with like pretty much any ultra modern card. I mean, there's probably a few that are like really interesting for whatever reason because of their lineage or whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I like that idea that you're not just collecting a card, but you're collecting a piece of the hobby's history.
Mm-hmm.
And you can kind of tell the story of the hobby with these cards, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I've been focusing on myself over the last few years. So if you're interested in it, I could definitely give you some pointers, and give you some things to really look into if you wanted to look more into it. But yeah, was there anything else that any other sets, any other sort of products or content that really has you extremely interested right now, going forward, that you'll once again kind of um, from afar, keep track of, or to keep your interest in the hobby?
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely some YouTube channels that I follow now pretty regularly. Like Pac-Man, I just like because his voice is nice, and he seems to always have like the newest stuff, so I can at least see what it looks like. And then I follow this guy, Run Good Life, who's based out of Seattle. I just like him because he's like super honest. And I've done a few of his breaks, and they're like always shipped like immediately, and like they get to you within a couple days. And there's just like so many scammy people in like the
Yeah,
breaks world, that I found him, and he like always will rip something himself before he does it in a break, so you can see what it looks like. And he does enough for me to make me feel good like spending money with him. So I support him, I guess, with that kind of stuff. And then there's some like, I don't know how to describe them, but like ephemeral, like vaguely related to the sports card hobby videos that I enjoy watching. Like like some of these people who will go and buy like huge bulk sets, and like sift through them. Like, I mean, that's the dream. Like, if you could ever just buy a garage full of cards and then just take a month off and just sort through those cards. So that definitely like scratches an itch for me. And I've started to go to estate sales just, for fun. I'm not expecting anything, but I feel like that is probably a more realistic, honestly, at this point, that is a more realistic way for me to find sports cards than like showing up to my grocery store once a week. Um, like I went to one and they actually had like some really nice old baseball cards. But at that time I like didn't know anything. And so I didn't know what to look for, what to offer. But I think that will probably be like my next step, is just showing up to a bunch of estate sales and seeing what I can find.
yeah, yeah. Those are always really fun. Yeah, and yeah, just the idea of getting to just spend time just going through just 1,000 cards that you bought randomly, and who knows, there may be a hidden gem or a few things in there that are worth 15, 20 bucks or whatever. And that's
Right.
kind of fun, yeah, to do that every so often. I did a lot of those back in the day. I haven't done those much anymore just because it is very time consuming, but but if
Yeah,
you do
for
have the
sure.
time, they are a lot of fun to kind of go through that. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to me about your interests in the hobby.